Good morning, everybody. This is really just to test the microphone and to check that everything is working. If it was being videoed as well, but it just gives you an opportunity of just settling down with your cup of tea, coffee.
It's now our time. Right. That's really noisy. I'll put that back on there then. Right. Welcome to this safeguarding training, everybody. Thank you, Hannah and team, for inviting me here. I've had a whistle-stop tour of your church. I understand a little bit about what you do, how you operate, which is always a good thing. We'll do the basics, which to tell you that the important thing, of course, is what time we finish. So you can probably see me better than I can see you, which is not a bad thing, I suppose. Just to say from the outset, you want to go away for 1 o'clock. You've been told 1:30. We're actually starting about 15 minutes early, and I've been told you are so attentive that with breaks you'll be on time and everything else. So who knows, it might even be earlier and you can go and enjoy your afternoon plans for whatever you're doing. Let's see how we go. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am, and then we'll go through, there's a lot of slides to talk through. We'll have some time where we'll look at some case studies which are very light. There's meant there to allow you to just get to grips with what we're talking about. I'm going to say right at the outset, before I even tell you a bit about myself, let's just check we're there. It is sensitive topics. If you're here today and you're doing safeguarding, well, what are we safeguarding against? We're safeguarding against abuse, against children, young people, and adults. Just based on maths, there are likely to be survivors of abuse in this room. Just based on research and other statistics would tell us that. So I'm going to say at the outset, do please protect yourself and look after yourself. We are in when Hannah said, did you want cafe style tables? And I said yes. I was expecting a room with tables around, not let's meet in the cafe. This is a wonderful experience, but it also means that if you need a few minutes out, yes, we will have a formal break if you like. But if you want a few minutes out, just because, then please do so. I don't know the ability of getting a top up for your coffees and teas, but there's probably even that facility available. Be relaxed. Now, that's not to say you leave now and come back at 1 o'clock and expect a certificate. And I will know who you are, of course, but there are people at the frontier who will. So I'm just saying that. And what you probably gathered already is I will joke where I can joke, but my language will be usually I go down a level, but I'll be picked up here for those on video. Where we need to talk seriously, we will talk seriously. I want to tell you a little bit about myself before we commence the set of slides for a reason. And that is, and you can read what the course content is there, but I'm just going to tell you about myself for a reason. When we look at these slides, you may well think, I can't believe it. Why has Hannah invited this guy in who hates the church? Right? Why has she invited somebody in who seems to be thinking about all these negative things about the church? Except I don't. I absolutely love the church. Tomorrow there is some training at another church and they will welcome me, but there is nothing better than being in my own church. I will miss tomorrow particularly because it marks somebody new coming that I'd love to see what they thought of church. Like, my favourite day of the week is Sunday. No, absolutely. But of course, God gives us all different vocations, and mine is to ensure that churches are safe, healthy spaces for everybody. And that hasn't always been the case. So you'll see some slides that will demonstrate that, because we can learn from mistakes of the past. And if it was just in the past, that would be fine, but it's not. It's happening today in terms of how churches have failed to protect those children and young people in our care, failed to protect the adults in our care. So that's what we're going to cover. And you've already gone down from me laughing a minute ago to the seriousness of what we're doing. You all are working with children, young people and adults. And because you're doing that, because you're in leadership or you're a youth worker or a youth pastor or whatever your title is, because you are doing that, you have a tremendous responsibility to ensure that everything that you do helps keep everyone safe, full stop. And if you take nothing out today, maybe that statement and one other, which is, if in doubt, contact your safeguarding officer. That's your golden takeaways. But let's just run through. I was going to tell you a little bit about Snap Hunter. Right. So I've told you that I love church. I've done all sorts of things in church. When I'm not doing safeguarding training, I run a food bank. So all sorts of things. What everything that you've done here, I couldn't believe that my own church is an old car showroom as well. When taken out from, so very similar to yourself. When I go to a Pentecostal church, though nobody knows what that means, right? Which is just little waters, and we just serve the community and want to ensure that people get opportunities knowing who Jesus Christ is as Lord and Saviour, full stop. So, many of you may have done safeguarding training in the past, and you may be saying to yourself, why have I got to give up yet another Saturday? For some of you, you're probably in education, you just had an instant day and you're thinking, oh no, that was only last month and now I've got to do this. Well, I hope you will see by the end of this that safeguarding is very contextual. What you do in the health service, what you do in education is different to what we do every day. The standards are the same, but actually I think our standards are far better. Why? Because our standards are based on godly standards, what Jesus expects of us in terms of our care, protection of those who we work with. And what you won't get, and you've got some slides coming up in a minute, what you won't get is the basis of what we should have a basis of in terms of a theology of safeguarding. Because if it's not theologically sound what we are doing, then why are we doing what we are doing? So we'll be looking at signs and symptoms, how to respond, how to report, values to report, and that journey towards a healthy safeguarding culture. Those are the things you probably have done if you've ever done any of the safeguarding. And let's just start. What does good safeguarding culture? This is a question for you that you don't have to answer now, but you will get, or I should say, you will get a copy of the slides as a handout. You will also get a certificate, and the certificate will be in the name you want it to be in. So if you want the Reverend's Doctorate at the front of your name, that's fine. Just check that Hannah knows exactly what you want on the certificate, and that's what you will get. So you get the certificate, get the slides, and please do whatever your style is. Some of you, it looks like your style is, I will just close my eyes and I will take it in that way. right? Others of you will be taking notes. Whatever it is, I hope that you will be able to absorb everything that we covered today, so that when working, and that will be tomorrow, you will be able to absorb that into what we do. The question is, what things do you need to do to have to ensure you've got a safe church, and what is good safeguarding culture? And we're going to cover those things as we speak. I'm going to move this way, which so that I can just see what Robin. I believe that we ought to have, and it's the only diamond my wife is likely to see this side of heaven. I'm sure usually the little one on the ring, but that's right. We should have a church safeguarding diamond. Why a diamond? Why this analogy? It's because it's that strong material. And it's all about ensuring that we have safe the culture. You can have policies and procedures. Church of England, if you were to print out all of their policies that their diocesan safeguarding advisor would have, the pilot would probably be to here. I know that because I've read them all, to some of the other work that I do. And I've been doing this safeguarding for me over 3+ decades. I worked for a charity called 318 for 18 years, 6% since 2016. I've been an independent safeguarding consultant. My own local Anglican diocese, I've been the chair of the Diocesan Safeguarding Advisory Panel, etc. I work across denominations, and independent churches in different streams, etc. So understanding where the church is at, I think I've probably got a good idea. And I can say having policies alone without having the right culture just means that you've got something to meet Charity Commission's requirements. Great. But if it's not a living, breathing document, if it's not reflective of what you are doing as a church, then it is just that paper. And so having a policy, ensuring you've got safe recruitment, working practices and safe behaviours, now we're getting there, and doing the safeguarding training, all of those things, knowing how to respond, all of those things matter, but we need to ensure our culture is right, and the quality assurance bit is, do we then review our policy every year to check that it's right? If there's an incident, do we then reflect on that to ensure that, could we have possibly done anything better to have managed that incident well? Those are the things that we need. Now, I said to you a minute ago, what we need to do is firmly base everything on Scripture. Now, I'm no theologian. If you'll work that out within the next 2 minutes, I'm no theologian, but I do know this, right? I do know that James says, and religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is it, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself untainted from the world. I'm going to say something now that I don't think we can argue with, so I'm moving away from my right, and that's this. We cannot guarantee that abuse won't visit our church. And I say this with the confidence of Scripture. And I say this with the confidence of Scripture in that we live in a sin-ravaged world. And until we get glory, that we are living in that sinful situation. And sin can visit our church. Our responsibility is to ensure that those intent on causing harm don't have the opportunities that they might have in other areas when coming to church. And the difficulty around all of that is that we welcome everybody, and we will look at that as in the next couple of slides. So, this is my view of Jesus. Jesus was the one that went to the lepers. Today's lepers, of course, will probably be those sex offenders in our community. How do we integrate somebody who may have caused harm to children whilst running any children's work within the church? These are questions that, if we haven't grappled with them, we need to ensure we've got everything in place and everything that's right. And of course, that assumes that somebody's going to come into the church, but my experience is that usually it's somebody in the church who's been caught, convicted, and then we're dealing with the fallout of that. But the Jesus that I serve is the one that rebuked the disciples around and brought children forward and said, if you want to know what it's like to be in heaven, be like this child. Sorry, I paraphrased a bit of scripture that, but that's the Jesus that we serve. And I said, and if Jesus wanted a miracle doing, he turned to a child and says, "We got any fish? Have you got any loaves? I can do something with them." He involved children, right? This is counterculture to everything. He put children in the midst, and we can all and those Sunday school teachers that are here, or whatever you junior church, whatever you call yourselves, will know that we often talk about Jesus putting his loving arms around children. Can we do that? Can we touch children safely? Yes, we can. Notice the word there was safely. It's not about can we touch children, because there's connotations of that, but can we touch children safely? Of course we can. But a sightless hood is better than a full frontal lock, particularly in teenagers' lives. We've got to think about those things so that we do things that are above and beyond the code. And if we don't do those things, if we don't do them, then that bottom scripture there, woe betide us. See, it says there, if we allow little ones such as these to stumble, to have harm done to them, better to have a millstone around our neck than to drown in the depths of the sea. And of course, we know when Jesus is talking, he's probably looking out to the Sea of Galilee, probably not the shallowest of places, right? And the millstone would have been quite a big rock to have there. And this is how Jesus talking. Right? Not meek and mild when he said that, I'm sure, because he's saying to us, woe betide you, get it guys. And that's why you're here today, I hope. And so, jump, so you just see. And as Brad Himbrick talks about, Brad Himbrick talks about, the difference for church is that we've got children, young people, we've got adults at a risk of harm, and we've got those who may pose a risk of harm coming into my church, and we've got victims and survivors of abuse. Not quite on our pews because we've got chairs, but you know what I'm saying here, right? And the gospel invites the sinner to find forgiveness in Christ through repentance, and it's the repentance that's important. The sex offender who says, God's forgiven me, why can't you? You turn around and say, if you're repenting, you'll stick to these boundaries that we put in place to ensure that you never have contact with children alone. You never have opportunity of working with children. It's not that we are denying God has worked in your life to remove that temptation, but true repentance is to move away. And we would never, and I'm going to say it now, I'll jump onto that. No, read this and then I'll come back to that, right? It invites sufferers to find refuge and comfort from the harsh and broken world where things like abuse occur. We also like to have survivors of abuse coming into your church, etc. Going back to that bit that I said about repentance and the sex offender. Careful grace tells us not that we are denying what God has done in somebody's life, but if somebody is truly repentant, they will not want to put themselves in the position where they would fall. And I always use this as a simple analogy, and that is, if somebody comes to your church, and whoever is the treasurer in this church, please just close your ears for this then. If somebody comes into the church and says, and I've just spent 4 years in prison for fraud and other financial misdealings, right? And I would like to help you manage finances in the church, and that and God has done all sorts, and I am a whiz at doing these things, and I can get you lots of money. You know what? I mean, I'm not part of your church, so it doesn't, it's not my type, but but you know what? If you decided to use that person, so be it. Your treasury's shaking here at the moment in time, but it doesn't matter. So be it. Do you know why? Because the only thing that you're going to lose is money. But the sex offender who says, I will work with children, I want to be around children, and we place them. I'm a chocoholic, I'm a coffeeaholic, and lots of others. Right, I've got more addictions than many of those that I work with who have real addiction. And mine's real. I could not work at Cadbury's because I know that their profit margin would go down. That's the reality. And that's what we need to recognise with those who may cause harm to children. We do not place people in positions where they might fall. That's not good stewardship. What we do is we work with that person to ensure that they can be called church, but only when we've risk assessed what that is and worked with statutory agencies to hear what they say about this person and not what the person said. Oh, this is all having the Satanist till the end. But I hope that gives you an idea as to why we're doing what we're doing. And the church has often conflated scriptures. Let me be clear, and you can read the scriptures here. Let me be very clear. There is a difference between a moral failing and a criminal act. And for too often, the church has been dealing with things in-house for criminal actions rather than taking it outside, because they've conflated these different scriptures rather than say, no, this is a criminal act, therefore we need to take it outside, right? Deal with the disciplinary after, but where child abuse or adult abuse is there, we need to take it to statutory agencies, full stop. And believe it or not, if we were to write the Children Act, the Care Act, and some of the other acts, from a Christian perspective, you will find that you would probably agree to 99.whatever% there at that, because you would, right? Because we all, our heart is towards the protection of those who are in need. Okay, so yeah. And why have churches done it wrong in the past? Very often the church has done it wrong in the past because of a misplaced understanding, and that in some way it will damage the reputation of God. Now, it might damage the reputation of the church, per se, but God's bigger than that. If what I said earlier is true, that we can't guarantee abuse can't visit the church, then how do we demonstrate that we are doing things right? If we are open and transparent, we work with statutory agencies, we do all those things that we should be doing, then, because we can't guarantee abuse as a bear, then we're more likely to show that actually we have done all things that we could have done, and our reputation might be more enhanced than it has been. So, what are we looking at? Well, what do we start with? We start with establishing a good, safe culture. How many here have been in more than this church? So you start in some of the church. Only one? Oh, that's better. Right, I was just checking, you see. Right, I might even ask you questions as well later. Right, okay. Now, I'm going to ask another question, which also requires you all to go off, right? How many here would say that culture here is different to the culture in the previous church they were in? Right. And most of you putting your hands up. And that's the reality. Church is about culture. One aspect of culture is ensuring that everything that we do is safe. Right? And that has not always been the case. And that's not to say, oh, well, you know, we're organic, we're doing this, we're doing whatever. Everything needs to be on the basis of ensuring the safety, and well-being of those we care for. And it's establishing governance. It's about listening and communicating. It's building effective structures. It's how we manage power, how we model safe behaviours. It's promoting awareness, education within the community. It's developing communication strategies for transparency, engaging with safeguarding initiatives. It's balancing pastoral care with accountability. I think list lots more there. You'll be getting these slides. It's basically ensuring that everything that we do means that we all have open and transparent community. Hear me right. That's not to say that we challenge everything our pastors do. That's not what it's about, right? And we have a fallout for whatever, right? And I'll talk more about that when we look at spiritual abuse perhaps. But yeah, it's about being open and accountable and honest and owning mistakes and doing things right so that people can see that we are who we ought to be. And you know, I expect you're going to have these things in place. You've got a policy. You know how to safe recruit, and we'll talk about these things later. And that's what today's training's about. And support workers, support survivors of abuse. We'll talk a bit about that. I've already talked about managing those who pose risk. I would expect as a church you're going to have these tangible things in place because most churches do. Have you got the other things? Are you open? Are you do you communicate well? Do you have good governance, effective structure, safe behaviours? They're the cultural things. If we have synergy between the two, then we will be that base where people will flock to because they know that we are safe. And when I say people, my mind goes to the survivor who is looking for somewhere where they want to feel accepted. I'm going to study some of our survivors now. I know I'm flitting, but if I illustrate things, I think it is helpful. If somebody has been abused by a Christian figure or within church, and they have a faith, when we talk about what miracles are, I'm going to tell you what I believe a miracle would be, or is. For that person to then walk into your church. That's a miracle. And I'll explain why I believe that to be the case. The reason I say that is because if they're walking into your church, they are probably walking back into a crime scene. Not that the abuse happened in your church, but the abuse happened by a Christian leader within a church setting, etc. That is what, in their minds, they are doing. How we welcome people, how we care for people who are often rejected at the stage of any form of disclosure, or for that later as well, matters. Everything matters in terms of how we are an open and welcoming community. And of course, there's a book that I mentioned there. I'd always say, if you're a leader in the church, if you've not read Scott McKnight and Barringer's
book. Laura Varringer is Scott Knight's daughter, who went to a church that imploded because of scandals involved in the past. If you've not read the book, it's called a church called Torfel Tove, which is the Hebrew, I believe, for goodness. If you've not read the book, it's well worth a read, because that's just about what good culture is. And if we have that there, and I'm not going to stay on those things, but empathy, grace, spelling people above institution, truth-telling, justice, service, and Christ-likeness, and that's what it describes within that. And you may say, well, that sounds great, and what's that to me as a children's worker? We're going to get on to what you do in a minute, but this is really just to look at what good culture is. I can put lots of things up here, and I've put this slide up just because it mentions a lesson learned review, and I happened to do it, so that's why the slide's there. But this hit the news, and it's about the failure of a church institution to respond appropriately to Three Sisters. The reason that, not because I was involved, but more to do with the longevity of when they first reported abuse. They were abused many years previously, and in the 1980s and the 1990s, they came forward and to this Langston diocese, and they came forward to that diocese and said, we were abused by a priest, and it was systematic abuse by our father, the priest, and another prominent Sunday school teacher, and others. And for decades and decades and decades, nothing was done. It took there's been a national inquiry called ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sex Abuse, and the sisters went forward to the Truth Project to try and empower that, where people could talk about their situation. And it wasn't until that happened that the church then found that they had to take action. And as a result, and the police, it failed as well. So the police reopened the case, etc. Several people have died. These people, the three victims, are in the 70s. But why am I telling you about this? I'm telling you about this because abuse affects people for a lifetime. These three women, although outwardly have had successful careers, two have got doctors in front of their names, etc. But the abuse that they suffered, they have carried throughout. They have yet to receive the apology that it talked about here. They have yet to receive the apology from the church. An apology can often bring about the heat. We need to act, and we need to act sensibly. Okay, I'm not going to stay on these slides there, but I do want to say this. I think the church is going through a difficult time at the moment in time because of issues around spiritual abuse. Now you won't find spiritual abuse in any of the statutory guidelines, etc. But many of you will recognise, sorry, I should do it that way. I don't know. Many of you will recognise my history. And the only reason I'm going to put that up, and I'll talk about spiritual abuse later, is this. Right? Some of you may have been to a Soul Survivor camp. Many of you will know a Soul Survivor in Watford. And Mike Pilavecchi was accused of spiritual abuse and harmful behaviours, which I would describe as unhealthy and sexual in nature, because I don't believe that giving massages to young men is an appropriate way of communicating with young men in the church. If you think that's fine, we can perhaps talk about that as well. I don't think that's appropriate. Now, what I think is important, and take this from everything, so there was
because he was a canon in Church of England, they did a review for the National Safeguarding team in London. They took the brave decision, the trustees of Salisbury Watford, to get King's Counsel barrister to do Scolding to do a review, which agreed with the first findings and found that his behaviour was such that it not good. Of interest, as soon as that came out, I've got CDs in my car because I'm old-fashioned. I know you're a Spotify generation, etc. Right, and I can tell you, I have Tim Hughes CDs and Matt Redman CDs. Anyone else? Good. Right, okay, right. At least one person, your minister at least has. Now, these prominent people who have Tim Hughes is a pastor of Gasfree Church in Birmingham. Matt and Beth Redman have had successful ministers here and in the US. These are people who, on the face of it, have had their journey in Christ. Would most people would say we would look up to them in terms of their ministry, etc. I mean, they were hiding the pain of what happened to them under Mike Philibetti. And if you've not seen Into the Light, which is a YouTube video that Matt and Beth Redman have done, it's well worth looking at to see that. The reason I raise that to you now is we've got to recognise that people don't disclose abuse of any form at the time of abuse. Very few do. Research into sexual abuse shows that the mean age between the abuse happening and disclosure is 30 years. Let's explain what I mean by that. Somebody is sexually abused at 8, they were probably not disclosed till about 38. I'm going to look at that in size time. I've looked at other research, it shows between a 3 and a 30-year period. Right? We need to ask the questions why people don't feel enabled to do so. Some of what came out of the review, the Scolding review, was this: that whenever Mike Pilavecchi did what Mike Pilavecchi did, and some of his behaviours, they were excused with the statement, "It's only Mike." Reflect for a second in terms of your own church journey and think, are there some of those low-level things that you could think of where you think, oh yeah, there was that person in church and we only say, oh, it's only Bill, or it's only George, or it's only Mike. And of course, it wasn't low-level what Mike Pilavecchi did, but I'm trying to drill something there in terms of culture. I'll get over some of the boring stuff, like this slide, as we're going. But just to say, understanding abuse, it's multi-layered, and we continue to understand abuse in different contexts. The work that you do here means that you'll be coming into contact with many different people and understanding where they're coming from and what might have been that past experience is vital, because we have something to give that is about how we can care and nurture and protect those in our church. And as we see, physical abuse, sexual abuse, organized abuse, the digital age, emerging issues, all of those things we need to recognise. And let me just, I'm not going to stay on these slides, but to illustrate one or two, and we'll look at the different forms of abuse, signs and symptoms, to Beckford quickly. But let me just say this. The first thing that we protected as a society was anyone, animals. You look at the RSPCA Charter, and admittedly it was to stop horses doing whatever. You look at the RSPCA Charter. Then they started protecting children. The Children Acts go back into Victorian times. You may have a view whether or not it was right or it's wrong. Hopefully you'll say it was wrong for children to go up chimneys and down aisles. And that's basically where we started. Then we gathered pace and we understand what abuse is for children. What might surprise you is this, in terms of adult protection, and the first all-encompassing act for the protection of adults was the Care Act 2014, which wasn't actually enacted, although that was it was enacted in 14, implemented in 2015. What does that tell us? That adult protection is relatively new in terms of systems that are in place. And I'll talk about adult protection as we go on so that you understand some of the complexities around that. But you can see there's lots of different areas here, and I'll cover domestic abuse and the rest, and you can see all of those things. What I do want to point out in terms of the display, safeguarding today was not just about having a safeguarding policy unless it incorporates a social media policy as well. And I will demonstrate that very, very easily to you. I woke up this morning and my alarm was my phone, set at 5 o'clock, 5:02, 5:05 and 5:10. I don't normally do that, but knowing I've got to travel here and knowing that I could miss an alarm, that's what I did. And knowing that my brain says, first alarm go, and then so I don't slow my life, ding, 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 stop, come on. I'll still disturb her for enemy, that's not from the alarm. If I wasn't coming here, right, and how many here use their phones to wake up in the morning? So, okay, there you are. Right. How many doom scroll before you get out to bed? How many admit to doom scrolling? None of you admit to doom scrolling? Yes, of course you do. But I mean, what's for me? You probably check. Some of you will check. Well, I'll tell you what I do. I check the news and I check the sport. Right? Obviously, the pastors go straight into their daily readings, but you know, that's what I do. Right? Right. Now, I was doing some training a few weeks ago. I tried this one out. Right, it's going to be back table over there. Right. Yes, you know who you are. Right. Right. I can tell you. Right. Now that back table. Sorry for the camera. There's a back table of young people that are just in there, from the young people to the young adults to this church. They're probably doing the youth work. Am I right? Youth workers? No. No, you're children's workers? Yeah, you look like, oh, right. Right, well, you know, right, you look so fresh. Right, I should have known you look too fresh to be you. Right, anyway, right. So there was some young people, you know, the 18-year-olds that come to do training, and I asked this question because I spoke to young people. I said this: at the end of an evening, do you check your socials before you get to bed? All right, so let's try it. Do you check your socials before you go to bed? Absolutely. Right, right. So we're narrowing down the people here. Right. Now, once you check your socials, do you then check your socials one more time before going to bed? You only do it the once?
I think you go in a hole though, because once my kids go to bed. Yeah,
oh, don't start justifying that. Yes or no was the answer. Right? You do, don't you? Right? You see, and that's it. We are so connected, right, that we will start our day online, and we will often end our day online, and sometimes we might go back just to nip, just in case, for the 5 seconds that we haven't checked, somebody done a post-op sort or, and if you ask young people, they will do it a third time, right? Now, if we do that as adults, we need to recognise that that is how young people interact. So if we don't have a clear social media strategy in terms of how we interact with our young people, see, if we're not in that space, we know some of the nasty things that are in that space, and we need to give a Christian voice in the areas that young people are interacting in. So it's not that we shouldn't be in that space, because we should, but it's how we do it. Now, for any of you that are teachers, you're going to, please forgive this as well. I think I will be able to eventually get out of here, but I'm not anyway. And it says, schools operate between 9 and 3:30. All right. Now, if any of you have had teenagers or have teenagers, you will know that their body clock is more akin to, on a Saturday morning, getting up about 12 o'clock, and at 10 o'clock at night, they are at their zenith. And if you've got any questions to ask them, you ask them at 10 o'clock at night. You might be tired, but that is when they have got queries. And some of you are agreeing with me here, so that's good, right? And that is the same for our young people. They go to the youth meeting at 7:30, you close it down at 9:30, their brain is exploding with what you've told them, and they want to ask you a question at 10 o'clock. How do we do that? And if you haven't grappled with that, that is where we need to be, to recognise that if they're in this room, it's okay, because the people are around. But if somebody's asking you a question, how do we do that safely? And can we do it? All right? Because we don't want parents to say, how much mean you've been talking to our young people at 11 at night? Rightfully so. But you can see what I'm saying. Social media, we need to ensure that marries with what we're doing in terms of evangelising our young people and helping them grow as Christians in what I think is a more chaotic world than when I was a teenager. All right? And you know, when I was a teenager, if I wanted to know when the youth group was, I had to walk. I found a strange walk. Right? I had to walk without step counts, I like that. I had to walk to the church, looked on a notice board, and walk back. But things are done more instantly than that. How do we catch it? So all of those things, and I realise I'm jumping on different areas. But you know, who are we safeguarding? We need to safeguard children, young people, and lots of risks of officer abuse, those who pose a risk. But we also need to safeguard ourselves. It says in Scripture we need to be above and beyond reproach in everything that we do. And how do we do that? I hope by the end of today you will start formulating other strategies to allow you to do so. Let's look at children's safeguarding. You don't need to worry about working together to safeguard children. I'm sure you've all read it in preparation for today, but if you haven't, it doesn't matter, because your safeguarding policy will incorporate all the regulatory guidance that there is for children and adults. That's what we policies there to do. But what is important to understand is this is the bit I give you my own trauma, which is simply this. It's a film that I watched as a child. Many people think that social services are going to come round and grab children and take them away. And that's why there's a reluctance to engage with them. Let me tell you this, that can be based on just too much misinformation. You know, the trauma I'm going to talk about is I can't watch the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Right? I'm sorry if I revisit anyone else's trauma, but that film, right, I can't watch, because I watched as a child, right, and from here, little children, or whatever he does, the child catcher, right? We all, yeah, if you've not seen the film, don't. As good as the film is, I don't know how it's a child's film, but anyway. Now that is traumatizing. And some people think that that's how social services operate. Some people think that, yeah, we involve social services, they're going to be all over this like a rash, and suddenly children are going to be taken away from the parents and everything else. Right? The last thing that the children's social care want to do is do that. We're going to look at figures here in a couple of slides' time, I'm sure. And those are going to show you how many children are subject to what's known as child protection plans. The majority of those children are still at home. Social workers are visiting them in their home. If there is a situation where somebody has caused harm, then the object is to remove the person who has caused harm and not the child. That's the reality. We can talk more about that. But I want to say this, and this is the thing that you need to pick up. In terms of if you have any concern about a child, you must pass that on to your safeguarding officer. The difficulty of me showing you a slide about significant harm is that this may be the threshold criteria for children's social care to be involved, and it may be a single traumatic event, or it may be a series of events ongoing, but we are often ignorant of other situations. So our children's work is over there. I'm now got a bond with them, and so I'll go to use them as an example. So they're working with one of those lovely ladies at the back is working with a 3 to 5 year old, and has got a concern about a child. Now she remembers from safeguarding training that she had yesterday. Oh yeah, there was significant harm. I don't think that meets that criteria. If she doesn't pass that on, we're missing the trick, because her colleague works with the 7 to 9 year olds and also has a concern about a sibling of that same family. Now, if those two pieces of information are passed on to our safeguarding officer, what can then happen is, right, our safeguarding officer is just there, right, what he will then be saying, I think, because I've got two pieces of information, I'm going to have a conversation with children's social care. Out of an abundance of caution, if nothing counts. Children's social care say, thank you for sharing that, because we've had a concern from a health visitor, a GP, a school, or whoever it is, and suddenly they're building up a picture that there may be an issue in this family. Now, that does not mean to say that they are going to remove those children. They're more likely not even to get to the stage of it needing to be a child in need of protection. It may be that we just recognise this as a child in need, and can we put some support mechanisms into the family to alleviate concerns that may be in order to help those children thrive. So if you have any concerns, you pass those concerns on. Most safeguarding concerns come out of pastoral issues. Got to say. And so, recognise that. I said to you, if you've listened to me so far, and at least 50% of you have, if you've listened to me so far, you will know that everything I've said would suggest that the issues that we are dealing with are sexual abuse and physical abuse that might lead to death. Because that's what I've sort of talked about, although I've sticked over the Victoria Columbia situation. What I want to tell you now is if our church reflects society, and let's face it, we would want that, wouldn't we? We want our church to reflect our local community. We want that. If that's the case, then we're more likely to be dealing with a situation of neglect than we are any form of abuse. over 50% of children subject to child protection plans are on those plans because of neglect. 38% because of emotional abuse. 7% because of physical abuse. And it's around 4% sexual abuse. And for the mathematicians here, you'll know there's a 3-4% difference there, where it's usually multiple abuse. That for some children, they will suffer all 4 forms of abuse. And so, that's the reality. We're more likely to be dealing with neglectful situations than anything else. We'll look at what that is in slides to come. Okay. We're just running through some of these, When I see you waving, we'll have a break and we'll do the thing. So, in terms of physical abuse, a form of abuse that may involve hitting, shaking, throwing, poisoning, burning, scald. You've got the list there. I think we would understand what physical abuse is. All right? It's that physical harm to a child. And so let's just look at some signs and symptoms. Now, the signs and symptoms that you have on here are 3 bullet points. I could give you a sheet that gives you 10 if you want, but it's understanding what we're talking about. It's about understanding that it is not consistent with an explanation. The child that's got 2 marks that look like a burn mark, well, that's unlikely to be a non-accidental injury, particularly if they're this side. So we tend to bruise on the bony parts, not the fleshy parts. And if you were to see something this side and it was 2 marks that look like cigarette burns, no child's going to stick the hand out second time, even if they brush by and core, and it'd be this side and on that side. It's recognising things like that. Injuries to unexposed parts of the body, lack of medical attention in treated illness. Why has a child not gone or parents taken the child to the GP? Why is that? Because they're worried what a physical examination might mean. It's those kind of things that we are concerned about. The child that comes in during the summer, and say for the adults as well, and they're wearing a thick jumper when everyone else is in a t-shirt, why is that? Are they hiding something under that jumper? Would we expect to see, you can shout this out for the sake it should be picked up on the filming as well, would we expect to see bruises on a baby? You can shout out for the sake of the film. No. Why? They're remote, they're not moving. Right? When they get to toddler age, we guarantee that our bruises are on. Right? I'm going to give you a scenario now, make you think. Right? Mom and Dad have split. They've got a shared care arrangement of little Tommy. And when Tommy comes in, having been with, I'll do Mom this week. I usually do it Dad, but Mom, really just don't notice anything. Following week, Dad takes the child, and when the child comes into your kids' activity, you notice that there's bruises on, cut here and a bruise there. Following week, Mom has a child, no bruises. Following week, Dad has a child. I used to do it the other way round, but this week I'm going to Stoke Club. Would you have concerns that it's a pattern of behaviour there?
Yes.
Yeah. You would? All right. Would you be asking questions about that?
Yes.
Yes. Would those concerns be alleviated if I tell you what happens over a weekend typically, and Mom and Tommy did the same, and Dad and Tommy's experience? So Mom, her idea of a good weekend, I told you I'd do it the other way, with stereotype. Mom's idea of a good weekend is to sit on a comfy sofa like you have here, get the telly on, get the popcorn machine out and the marshmallows, and to watch movies, right? And Tommy loves that. Dad's idea of a good weekend is that they go out on the mountain bikes around this area. I don't know where you go, but anyway, go out on the mountain bike. And yes, Dad has a lot of the gear that we could put on, helmets and whatever, but we can still fall off a mountain bike and get good tomorrow. And Tommy loves that. And as I say, flip it the other way for whatever purpose. Do you now have those same concerns? No. If you don't port pay, you'll have that concern and it will stay with you. And it may not be the explanation I've just given. That's what we're talking about. And then somebody can have a conversation. Say, oh, I noticed a few bruises there. Oh, yeah, last week we did this and we went up Oledo Mountain and it was fun, but we both forgot cuts, but, I always carry a first aid kit, except, you know what I'm saying? Oh, that is what we're talking about. Neglect. It's the persistent failure to meet a child's basic and or psychological needs delighted. So it's seriously bad. Your child's health and development. And you can see there providing what should be the failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, protection from physical harm, ensuring adequate supervision, ensuring access to appropriate medical care, providing suitable education, etc. Now, what I want to say is this. We have certainly gone through a cost of living crisis. When I'm not doing this safeguarding training, I work in a food bank. So I know the difference between what is neglectful behaviour and what is that people are struggling financially. That's not what I'm talking about here. The easiest way of talking about neglect is through cases that are in the public domain. Now, I'm going to talk about a child who, not a million miles away from here actually, called Daniel Pelka. And because it's not a million miles away, I would expect perhaps some of you may remember the case of Daniel Pelka. Polish boy, in preschool, the mom went into the school instead. Daniel's on a special diet. So don't give him anything extra. He was malnourished. He died literally of starvation. He lost significant weight in the time that he was in the preschool. And as well as the physical injuries, it was probably the neglect that killed him. His parents were both charged with murder, convicted. It happened in Coventry. Coventry Social Services did what was then known as a serious case review. The serious case review found a number of damning situations where, had action been taken, we may have seen a different output. I'm going to name 3 of those situations for you, and you can read about it in the serious case review. The first one was a member of school staff noticed that Daniel was scavenging by the bins of food and did not report that. On another occasion, the teachers had a birthday, came in with cake, she had a class. The children went out to play, Daniel stayed behind and failed with that himself, and he had a significant amount of the cake. The third occasion was or occasions were that other children in the preschool were given Daniel food out of their lunch boxes. Now, understand this, right? And you've got a fantastic cafe here. If children finish a children's activity and you put plate biscuits on the side, right, and juice, right, I would expect those biscuits to be gone in about 10 seconds, right? And if they haven't gone in that period, it's like, wow, you know, you've obviously not put enough berries in your way. But you know, that's the reality. So it's not that. Mr. Kipling advert ruined it for me because I used to say this, and I still do it, but if you know the advert where the brother takes the capers and Popping takes it to his sister, that's a good explanation. Warm-hearted, I don't know any brother that takes a cake to his sister, but anyway. But the child that puts the biscuit in the pocket, why do you give them that? Because it's a meal later. That's what we're talking about. Know the children that we are working with. Understand some of the subtle signs there. And that is, because it may be that actually a family's stuck here. And outwardly, we don't know. And it's not that it's neglect, but it's actually people are genuinely stuck. And malnutrition, begging, stealing, hot food, all of those type of things, that's neglectful things. And then emotional abuse. You know, at this stage, I want to tell you something. There is no hierarchy of abuse. Whether you suffer physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect, there is no hierarchy. And you ruin an adult, you abuse them as a child. For some people, the emotional harm that's happened to them has changed their worldview until we can introduce that to Christ to see that they are born again and wonderfully made, etc., etc. For some people, they'll have such a poor view of the self-image of themselves because of the emotional harm that's being perpetrated against that. And it's that persistent act. Not, if any of you have been parents, are parents, etc., and you'll know that, if you haven't chatted your child once or twice in that time, then, well, you're a saint, But the reality is that would have happened a long way. But where it's persistent and saying to the child, I wish you'd never been born, you're useless, those type of things, they're just crushing the spirit of that child. And you can read the definitions there. It's back compared to the child that are useless, worthless, etc. It's saying that they're only valued in so much as they meet that apple's needs. And of course, it's inappropriate expectations for their age or development. If you've got, by the way, a super skilled child that's going to do the Olympics, absolutely great. But I can say this, I should never ever have expected my two sons to go and play football for England, certainly not genetic wise, because I can't kick a ball straight. It's just not there. Although they are okay at football, but they're not going to be as Ronaldo and Messi. So why do we perhaps project things onto children that's just not going to happen? But actually, some people, some children have grown up far too fast and they've lost their childhood for a long reason. Causing children to feel frightened or in danger, the exploitation or corruption of children. That's what I'm talking about. And they're the areas that if we have concerns, just to remind you that 38% of children subject to child protection plans are on there because of emotional abuse. But him, right, as not just it's not about I've lost it once or twice. When I was a social worker way back, when I was doing my social work training way back, and that really is way back. There was a book called Good Enough Parenting, as if that was the thing, on a scale of whatever. And it's not, we can't judge. Every parent will have a different style. But what we're talking about is abusive actions. Not, I'm parent that child in a different way and why can't they control their children because they're whatever. Everyone parents children differently. And that's not what it's about. What it is about is there emotional harm happening here. And then for sexual abuse involves forcing and enticing a child who birth to take part in activities and not necessarily involved in high level of violence, but the child is aware of what's happening. It may involve physical contact, etc., etc., etc. Notice there that it says the child may not know what's happening. It doesn't need to involve force. What does that tell us? It tells us this. 90+% of sexual abuse was committed by somebody known to the child. 90+%, around that fight. Obviously, it's parents and whatever the family is, just parents, aunts, uncles, step-parents, etc., etc. All of that. It's research showed that one piece of research showed that somebody knew that this cohort of sex offenders, knew that they had a sexual interest in children by the age of 21, and a significant number of those then chose a career path which brought them into contact with children. So they became teachers, social workers, pastors, youth pastors, whatever they could do in order to get in contact with children. It doesn't take rocket science to work out why they chose that. Because if that is your motivation, then you go out to do things. But of course, the easiest way of getting in contact with children is within a family unit. That's what sexual abuse is. And of course, for many children, they want the abuse to stop, but they don't want anything to happen to the person they love. And that's why it says often it doesn't involve a great deal of threat or violence. The threat or violence is usually around, you must keep this a secret. And let's be clear what a secret and a surprise is. A surprise will be revealed, a secret is to be kept forever. So if Mom's got a birthday and Dad's arranged a party, unlikely how no, but that'd be a surprise because it's going to be revealed when the party happens. So when the child comes to you and says, can you keep a secret? What they really mean is, can you keep this surprise from? And we need to understand what those things are for what the boundaries are when we talk to particularly younger children. Older children, I think, could articulate like this and that. When we look in terms of things, you are unlikely to hear an allegation of abuse for the reasons I've given you. Let just remind you that the NSBCC wrote the book, Why Children Don't Tell. It was not called Why Children Tell. It's none of your business. I didn't think I'd be believed. I was frightened what might happen to me, etc., etc. That's why children don't tell. And we think children know their rights, but of course, knowing rights and actually wanting action taken. And if you heard a disclosure of abuse, it's as likely that the person that's disclosing to you is giving you their terrible secret and handing it over to you as a present for you to deal because they don't feel in their way to. How we respond to what's just been given to us will often make a difference. If you look at many of the when the inquiry happened, many of the people who said they've disclosed, particularly in the church environment, said, we disclose this and nothing is done, and disclose another time and nothing is done. Very often because the person hearing that disclosure couldn't believe what they were hearing or didn't know how to deal with the gravity of what had just occurred, and the flows out there. So they don't want to think bad of that person who was described and caused them harm. And nobody goes into children's or youth work, or even work with adults to hear a disclosure of abuse. As I say, thankfully it is less likely than the mental case you will. You're more likely to notice that children have got preoccupation with sexual matters through drawings, play, or just their behaviours. And why are they acting the way that they are? And they might be the trigger things. Underlying factors are, this is known as being diagrammed over here as a toxic trio. Where there's violence, where there's parental mental health, where there's parental substance misuse. Surprise, surprise, if you've got those three things happening in the background, children's lives are not going to thrive because of those three things happening in the background. And you can see the list here, but hear me right. It doesn't mean to say that it's a disability in the household that's going to be abused or anything else. These are just some underlying factors which may create a more chaotic situation or may put for people under stress and strain, etc. Everything needs to be balanced. What I don't want you to do, because we've now done checklists today, what I don't want you to do is go into your programs tomorrow and look at all of the children and start ticking, oh yeah, oh, right, because that's not what it's about. It's like the medical student who goes to a lecture, hears about disease and comes away saying, oh, I've got leprosy, or I've got whatever. Not because they have, but because they say, oh, I started itching, I'm now itching. How many's here and down feels because I've got like that? Oh, I started itching, I've started doing it. I must have. That's not what it's about. Know the children, the people you're working with, but recognise that there can be signs and symptoms. Okay. You want a break? Yeah.
So, welcome back to this second part. I can't think that I'm going to stay sat for too long here. I think I'll probably end up standing more than I am sat. But you will have noticed that I have moved from over there more here because I don't know whether or not you could all hear at the back. You're now worried that I might eventually jump over here and start talking to you all. But your wonderful camera operator has said, yeah, don't you worry, wherever you go, this camera will capture you. So, which is, and he's got all the slides, he says. So that's a bit scary in itself. So, I hope you found the first, sorry, or to add, he said, and also it will keep him awake, which is also a worry. But I hope you found the first part interesting in terms of this is what safeguarding is about in the church. Everything that we do, and we're going to look at some studies so that you can sort of embed that into your learning as we go on. But a lot of what and I will be skipping over a lot of the adult protection slides because it's really a replication. What I want you to be able to get out of today is an understanding of those basic things of how do we keep children safe, how do we recognise if harm might be happening, and how do we respond appropriately. And so we're still in that area of, well, what's the different forms of abuse? And this is where I do stand up and the camera moves. And so we've still got these slides here, and you'll notice on the slides we've got Domestic Abuse Act 2021. It seems strange that we've had
legislation in terms of the Criminal Act of domestic violence for a few years, but we've not actually had an act that has given a full definition. And in the full definition, which you've got there, you can see that it's a single instant or a course of conduct that includes physical harm, violence, controlling and coercive behaviour, economic abuse, psychological, emotional abuse, etc. Now, the interesting thing is well, there are two interesting things here, is that we've had a definition for coercive controlling behaviour before we had this act come into being, because all other previous agencies had relied on Women's Refuge and other organisations to give us definitions, whereas this is now a statutory definition of what we consider to be domestic abuse. Now, and domestic abuse and harm, what you will notice, let me just be clear to you. The age of a child is anybody under 18 years of age. When you get to 18, you become an adult. Now, with domestic abuse purposes, the age at which the legislation comes into force is actually 16. And the reason for that is because the age of consent for sexual intercourse is 16, and of course people could go and cohabit at that age. What you cannot now do, which up to about 3 years ago you cannot now get married at 16. You used to be able to get married at 16 with parental consent. There is now a piece of legislation that prevents that, and not many did get married at 16, but it prevents that to stop forced marriages, to stop the 40-year-old marrying the 16-year-old. So you now have to be 18. So I would imagine that although this is a fairly new act, that there will be some additional changes to this act to reflect that from a timeline. Now, the domestic abuse, and this is coercive and controlling behaviours, and you can read that. What I want to tell you about domestic abuse is some of the stats. Based on research, 1 in 4 females, 1 in 8 males will have suffered some form of domestic abuse incident in their adulthood. That's based on some recent research, and that would be male on male as well, because marriages and whatever, that's covering everybody. But that's the reality. Now, if it's 1 in 4 women will have suffered some form of domestic abuse incident, do the math in your own church and work out how many people that may be. And before we say, yeah, but we're Christians, aren't we, and these things don't happen in Christian households, do they? Well, the only piece of research that has been, and it's fairly modern research, was done by Restored, which is a Christian domestic abuse charity here in the UK. And they did some research with Lancaster University, and their findings were very similar to other national research. I think we need to recognise some things around domestic abuse from a Christian perspective. You see, very often, why do people not leave domestic harmful relationships? Well, they might not leave because they love the person, though they don't like the harm being done, but they might be staying because they're a Christian. Because we teach people about the vows that they made before God. And people may stay in a relationship because they feel, well, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. I want to say something about that, and they don't want to break their Christian vows. Well, let me tell you something about that. The vows before God is this:
the moment he makes a fist, and for those that are going to say, why don't I say she makes a fist? I say he makes a fist because it's 1 in 4. So I'm just basing that on statistics. Of course, there can be male perpetrators of domestic abuse, and that becomes more complex because of denials, because men don't speak up about male rape and other things, etc. So I'm not denying that can happen, but based on statistics alone, I'm going to say to you, the moment he makes a fist is when he breaks a marriage vow. Yes, I believe that the marriage, I've celebrated 35 years of marriage, my Jew is the most important person in my life. Of course, I value my marriage above all else. Yes, Lord, and you. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying. Marriage is absolutely. But if he makes that fist, then he is breaking that vow, right? Where it says, till death us do part, does not in any way entitle him to kill you. That's the reality. And we can only work with people. It's not about you need some marriage counselling. It's about ensuring the protection there and then looking to see if there can be any reconciliation and maybe anger management, etc., etc., etc. But for some people, they, sadly, might not happen. But that's not a failure if people are protected. Now, with all of this, and that's heavy, isn't it? And and I'm more than happy to debate all these things with anybody, because actually we're there to protect. But yeah, it's important that our marriages are healthy, and we can help people understand what a healthy marriage looks like, and it doesn't involve hurt, humiliation, intimidation, exploitation, isolation, or domination. Right? That's not a healthy marriage, right? Or anything for that matter, right? Now, I mentioned this act, and the act is important for this reason. With adult protection, we are talking about serious harm in the same way as with children we talked about significant harm, and it's very similar. So it may well be that the adult comes to you and says, I'm in this domestic abusive relationship, my marriage is and I've got to be a better wife or a better husband or whatever's being said, right? And from what they're saying there, you don't think it's reached a threshold of significant or serious harm, as we say for adults. And so you're going to work with them and say, well, look, we need to help you so that your marriage is enriched from a safer way. And that's fine. And we must always assume that adults have capacity unless we know differently. And that's how we would pastorally care for somebody. And I'm sure that those who have been in pastoral ministry for many years, what I've just described is something that they've done a dozen times and more, and you don't know about it, and nor should you. But if we know there are children in the household, it ceases to be just an adult protection matter, and it becomes a child protection matter, because what we know is that children get affected by what they see, what they hear, and sometimes they're actually used, right? If you don't do what I say, I'm going to harm, right? And that is why under this new act, if there are children in the household, we treat it as a child and an adult protection matter, and it can't be kept just with the adult. Obviously, if a crime's been committed, if there is serious harm, then even if the adult doesn't want anything doing, we would take action there to protect everybody. But yeah, I'm just letting you know where things are at. And then, of course, we've got spiritual abuse. And I can give you lots of definitions of spiritual abuse, but it's this: a form of psychological and emotional abuse that occurs when somebody uses their religious or spiritual beliefs to harm, manipulate, or control others. I would bring agency into that. Where somebody removes their agency so that they can't act. You know, in the same way as I said to you, why don't people leave domestic abuse situations because they love the person? You know, people don't leave their partner very often because if somebody's coerced and controlling, what do? They've got the passports, they've got all the identifying documents, you're frightened to death. Let me just tell you something. 1 in 2 women die at the hands of their partner every week. 1 in 2 women, right? That's, do the maths, that's 70 plus women, right? When is the most dangerous time for, and I'm coming back to spiritual abuse, I'm joining the two together for you to understand something. When is the most dangerous time for a woman to leave a relationship? I've told you. When is the most dangerous time for a woman? Very often when they've left that relationship. Because he will be saying, if I can't have you, nobody will. Pregnancy is a difficult time as well. There's additional violence there, etc. But it's not all about violence, it's that coercive and control that I'm talking about. Somebody won't leave the relationship because I've got to move away because I'm fearful of violence. And my children will have to go to a different school. I've got to leave the church that I was in. I've got no money because I've got to leave my job, and I can't even claim benefit because I've got nothing to prove who I am because everything's in his name, etc., etc. So the short-term gains are never that easy. There's always, or it's always short-term losses to the long-term gain of not having that person in their life. Understand that for some people, they know when, because there's often a cycle of abuse, and those that have done any research or any training in domestic abuse will know that. But you know, why is it, and this is a societal thing that we ought to be shouting about, why is it that come next year there will be extra people working for Women's Aid and other domestic abuse charities for a period of time when England play a football match? Their helplines will increase. Why? We do well. So at the quarter-final stage, they'll have extra workers, and there's a bit of relief because England win. We might get through to the semi, and they've got extra workers in, but England win. They don't always, but not. But then we get to a final, and we lose on penalties, and there's a spike. You can see what I'm saying, all right? When we talk about domestic abuse, spiritual abuse, to understand that for many people, right, who here counts the church as home? Who here has got better relationships with some of the people in this room than they have with their own blood relatives? Well, I don't know you, but I would put a hand up for my own church. And who here has probably got blood relatives in the church that they're in? I know some of you have because I've been introduced. You can see what I'm saying, right? So understanding spiritual abuse is to understand how difficult. That's why when I talked about, Mike Pilavecchi and then talked about why people haven't disclosed, etc. It's because if you leave a controlling environment, you're bereft, right? It's like a bereavement. And that is why some people stay in far from ideal situations. And part of spiritual abuse is to remove your agency. In other words, who you are, because you've been soul beaten. That's why it's important to have that good, open, transparent culture that I talked about earlier. My friend Lisa Oakley talks about it in this way. And you know where, I'm sure you are here, right? But not all churches are. And so good, nurturing, people flourish and grow. Jesus' model, servant leadership. That's my view. Unhelpful, it's not harmful, but it's not a helpful place. And then you get the unhealthy, and you get the spiritually abusive, where it becomes a persistent pattern of coercive and controlling behaviour that reflects the definition of psychological abuse. That is what we're talking about. And I did some work, and whilst you read that slide, I just want to say to you, I did some work with a church, and I just want to illustrate this. The pastor of the church was so controlling that and I was sent in to interview everybody because of the harm that had been done to them. And when I interviewed one of the women, she had been off work, and the doctor had issued whatever they call them now, sick notes or whatever. She'd been off work for 3 months, and the doctor wrote on that note, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, she worked for the church. She hadn't been in a battleground, or maybe she had. And the symptoms of the psychological harm that had been done to her meant that went down on her sick note. I was to interview the youth leader at the church because the minister had been removed, and part of this was to see, And so I was going to meet with the youth worker who'd also similarly been affected. He got within 150 metres of the church, which is where we were going to meet in the coffee hour, and he started shaking and couldn't come into the church, and so we met elsewhere because he did not feel it was a safe environment, even though the perpetrator had gone. And if I tell you that happened in the last year, I think we've got a bit of a reckoning. If we don't have character to go with charisma, then we've got an issue. Contextual safeguarding I'm not going to stay on. Let me just wrap up some of this, and then I hope and then we're just looking at a bit of adult stuff, and then we'll do some exercises, and then you'll be pleased to know that I'll take questions, and then you'll be, abuse can happen here. I hope that from everything that I've said today, that you can see that. Stranger danger is what happens online. It is not what happens elsewhere. It is very rare. Children don't tell, we know that, right? And women don't sexually abuse, and children don't cause harm. Well, let's have a look at a couple of slides. Female sexual abuse. Right, I am a male, in case you hadn't noticed. I am a male, and I mention that because 95% of sexual abuse is committed by males. But that does not mean to say that we ignore the 5% of females who may sexually abuse. If we ignore the fact that there is that demographic, we run into difficulty. Because I've known women who have caused harm to teenage boys, in the case I'm thinking of, right? Because that's where they got their affection from, and all sorts. So, recognise that, we can look there. Now, this is something that none of you admitted to being youth workers earlier. I wonder who you are, right? Oh, well done. Oh, you're in safe hands, I can tell. Well, at least one of you has admitted to it. Great. Okay. Well, what I want to say about this is that the biggest call to childline is bullying and cyberbullying. Notice the two combined. What I said earlier about online, offline. Right? It doesn't stop at the school gates now. It's all invasive in everything that we do. Now, I used to say that a third of sex crimes were committed by juveniles. And that's quite a lot, 1 in 3. And that was based on research done by the NSPCC, and also Professor Don Grubin was the first one to use those stats, and that's what it came out with. I've had to change that because that's based on research, which is correct in terms of the two pieces of research that I would pull from because they're national standard pieces of research. But what I can now tell you is this. What you have before you is crime statistics. So this is crimes which between January 2022 and December 2022, which came out, the research always takes a couple of years to come out because they have to do whatever, came out in January 2024. And I know about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was some similar research that the stats have been updated and it shows exactly the same. Over half of sexual crimes are committed by juveniles. 52% of child sexual abuse and exploitation, child on child. What we're teaching our young people, that they're getting a criminal record from 10 onwards because they don't understand sexual boundaries. Because. And should we be surprised that it's young people who are causing harm to other young people? Well, I've said to you that in terms of emotional harm, bullying, that's the biggest cause to child line. If half of our sex crimes are committed by juveniles, and this is not to scapegoat young people, because I'm going to pull it back, but if half of sex crimes are committed by juveniles, I'm now going to talk about another crime that we would recognise. And if we don't recognise what gang culture is, then and where young people are finding identity today, then we're perhaps missing something else. I'm going to prove to you that knife crime is not a juvenile justice issue, but a child protection issue. Who predominantly carries knives? Young people. Now, I've given you the first bit. Let's see if you can do the next bit. Who predominantly is the victim of knife crime? Who predominantly is the perpetrator of knife crime? So if young people carry knives, they perpetrate the crimes and they're the victims of crimes, why are we not recognising it as an epidemic that we ought to be doing something about and having a Christian voice in? I might add on top of all of these other things. And how do we work, sorry, because you're the only one that put your hand up, how do we work with our, because they're all online the rest, how do we work with our young people to keep them safe, to talk about correct boundaries so that they know what a healthy sexual relationship is within a marriage and how to navigate that difficult time of girlfriend, boyfriend and what we should and shouldn't be doing, etc., etc. How do we do all, there's a lot for you to do, how do we do all of that and also teach them all those other things and talk about what bullying is and how to stay safe when they're in their schools and their colleges. Oh, anyway, that's your takeaway homework, so brilliant. Right, amen to that, she says. So adult safeguarding. So let's park children for now, but you'll be pleased to hear this is the whistle stop bit, because there's going to be loads of slides that I'm not going to really stop at. An adult in need of protection. So I mentioned that Care Act 2014, and within that act, what we've got is a very narrow definition. We don't need to worry about that, because if a crime's been committed, that's probably going to be the police. If anything else is needed, I'm going to illustrate this. If you consider, we saw the word contextual safeguarding. If I use the word situational, circumstantial, and contextual for adults, and we ground that in what we do, we don't need to worry too much about whether or not it meets this criteria, because an adult over 18 who is at risk of abuse or neglect or exploitation, and because of their care and support needs, and because of that they can't protect themselves. That is such a narrow definition that it would not count for many of the people that we work with. Hence why you try and get a DBS check done for most of your ministries and find we don't qualify, because we're not doing teaching training, we're just doing this, and the adults we're working with don't meet that criteria. Yet we as church are doing more things with adults than anything else, as well as the children's and youth work. But primarily, most of our ministries are often the pastoral care that we give to other adults. So don't get hung up with the definition there, but think about who may and who may not be an adult at risk, and recognise how we care for people. So let me just say, somebody may be an adult at risk, and I'll talk about terminology in the next slide, for a variety of reasons. Age and frailty. You don't get to a certain age and then become at risk, right? Somebody may be frail and have some difficulties at 60 or 80 or 100. We reach a chronological age. Physical illness may be putting us at risk. Mental illness may be putting us at risk. But for a lot of the time, our mental health may be good. And so that dissipates in terms of, if somebody's bereaved at that period of time, they may well be at risk. Their world's imploded, they've lost their loved one, etc. 6 months down the line, we would hope that as time heals and everything that they need, they won't be at that same thing. Now, the person who is bereaved, who skips a meal, okay. But if they start skipping 2 or 3 or 4 meals, then that's when we would be looking at, well, that's self-neglect. And we get involved in ensuring that they've got food inside them, etc. So you can see what I'm saying, right? There are going to be lots of reasons here. Let me just see what the next slide is. Yeah, I'll talk about terminology, and then I'll slip back to that other slide. In terms of terminology, understand that language evolves, right? We don't, maybe you read the King James Version of the Bible. I'm ESV man myself, but because it's different language, right? Same understanding, and that's how it is with some terminology. So don't think this is wokeness. This is just trying to understand terminology. So, vulnerable adults, I still use the term vulnerable adults, you will still use it. Don't get hung up on any of this. But it's changed in the Care Act to adults at risk of harm, adults in need of protection, adults at risk. That's just the language in the legislation. So my slides reflect that. But don't worry, because you will probably understand it better as vulnerable adults. And understand that it's about the characteristics of the people experience harm, rather than labelling everyone the. It's not the vulnerable, it's not the disabled. We don't use the term handicapped, cap in hand. We don't use the term the disabled. We started using the term a person with a disability, person first. It's just evolving language to be more descriptive, and recognising that just because somebody has a disability doesn't mean to say that there isn't any inherent risk there. Ask our Paralympians whether they feel at risk. But there are going to be times where people do feel that, and that's why I emphasise the importance, going back a slide, that it's look at what's happening. So, tonight and last night, in my place, my home of Chorley, some of my friends went out wearing blue high-vis jackets with the word street pastor on their back. And they don't recognise that what they're doing is safeguarding, but that's what they do. They carry radios so they can talk to the police and the council if need be, and back at base. They carry lollipops and they carry flip-flops, right? I never understood the lollipop thing for a lot of reasons. But why do they do so? What are they doing? they're caring for people on our streets to get them home safely, get them into the taxis, get them onto the buses. Why? Because those people have ingested or drunk too much alcohol, drugs, and whatever. Those same people today don't need a street pastor outside their house, right? They need paracetamol maybe, they need, their head's hurting, but they don't need that. That is circumstantial or circumstances or situational vulnerability for the people there. Sorry, I realise I'm getting far too close. That is the reality there. And that is how, if we think about that as a model, and we think about that in terms of how we are working with adults, we are better placed to say, okay, we're starting up this ministry. Can we qualify for safer recruitment? Yeah, we will do safe recruitment. Can we qualify for DBS check? Well, actually, this ministry would, or it wouldn't. Well, we've asked the local day centre for people with learning disabilities to come into the cafe, and we're doing a craft session. Well, that would, great, tick, that's great. Well, this is just an open cafe and we're doing a particular thing, and we might have people with disability or not in here. Well, that doesn't qualify, but do we need to recognise some of the things that we might need to do for that particular ministry? If we approach everything with that mindset, we will be better placed to ensure the safety and protection of all. And so I'm not going to go into all of these things, just to say that where we talk about the Care Act, a lot of the Care Act has been written specifically, and it's only really sections 42, because there's a lot more in there, so don't read it. But section 42 is really saying this is a protection of adults, this is what we need to do, and it looks more at the residential sector, which is why we have organisational discrimination, discriminatory abuse, etc. So I'm going to flick through lots of these slides in a whirlwind. You will get them because I like to give you something to read, but I pull out, so we'll get through them quickly. Firstly, understand the difference between an adult and a child is we recognise that adults have autonomy. We should always assume an adult has capacity unless we know that they don't, in which case we're probably working with our social worker, their community health nurse or whoever around that. But assume everyone has capacity, right? And so we've got autonomy, which means that as adults we take risks, okay? That's what we do. Right? We go through a stage in life where we start taking risks. It's a developmental stage from our teenage years onwards. And that is what it's about. And we recognise that for adults, we would always engage with an adult to see what their wishes and feelings are. We do with children, but it's based on their age and understanding, what's often known as the Gillett principle. But certainly when we get to adults, we assume that adults have capacity and may live in far from ideal situations. It's only where serious harm, a crime's being committed, those are the areas where we would start saying, even though you have capacity and autonomy, we have concerns, and we would report that on. I think that's important. To illustrate what risk is, let's use an illustration of what risk is. I love taking photos. I just came back from Switzerland. It was absolutely wonderful. And although I did a run up a mountain, most of the time caught a cable car up to the top, take a photo, cable car back down. Some people, believe it or not, when at the top of a mountain, put very thin blades onto their feet, right, get two poles and project themselves off that mountain with loads of snow, right, fast. Now, to me, that's a risky thing to do, because you don't know what's underneath that snow, right? And do they call it skiing? Now, we all take risks in whatever we do. It's only where that risk comes into the criteria that I've given that we would look and seek an intervention. So, you will see that the 6 safeguarding principles, I'm not going to go through them all, but number 3, proportionality, is this. Sometimes, if we have involved adult social care, 2 weeks later they've disappeared. And we say to ourselves, all that work and effort and everything else. Because if you're like me, I'm a bit overprotective of everything. And even if you're not like me, but we want more involvement. And adult social care said, but we put the intervention in, we're quite happy with that, and we've removed themselves. Why? Because it's that autonomy for adults. And of course, we will always involve the adult there. Okay, this is the slides that I run through. I'm not going to cover that because I already have done. What I want to say about, I'm stopping on this slide for one reason, to skip back to children. When I did the children's slide, the definition given was, because these are definitions from Care Act, the definitions that you had on the slides from the children was from a document called Working Together to Safeguard Children. I'll put a picture of it up at the beginning. It talked about children being enticed to be involved in sexual activity, whether they knew what was happening, etc., etc., etc. And that's a good definition, because it explains things. But what it misses, and why I've stopped at this slide, is that if somebody says an adult has been sexually harmed, we understand that to be rape, sexual assault, etc. Sometimes we can miss, when we talk about a child being sexually harmed, that what we are actually talking about is a child being raped, is a child being sexually assaulted, a child being penetrated. So that's why I stop at this slide, because sometimes we can miss the very essence of why we are protecting the children that we are doing, because we can actually miss the exact thing that we're talking about. And I've lowered my voice, I know it happens naturally, but I hope that we capture what we're there to prevent. That we might be the difference between a child going home to a situation where they're going to be sexually harmed to not. And the same goes for all the other forms of abuse. But I think enough said. And then the psychological abuse, and the only reason I'm stopping here is to say that you may get not confused, but you may say, why do you use psychological abuse in adult safeguarding and emotional abuse in child safeguarding? They're one and the same. And what you will find is the definition of psychological abuse starts with the word emotional. Okay? Neglect, I've already said, we need to recognise self-neglect is an important issue as well. And financial abuse, misuse or theft of money, exploitation, fresh connection to wills, property, inheritance, etc. We know about good stewardship. And good stewardship is not just about how money comes in, but who we take it from, etc., etc. And we may cover that as we go on. And I would hope that we recognise what discrimination is in all its forms. We should be a welcoming church to everybody, irrespective of all of the things there. And that's not about in any way watering down, because I'm assuming this is a lovely Bible-believing church that has lots of principles. We're there to introduce people to Jesus wherever they are coming from, whatever baggage they are bringing. We can shine a light into the dark recesses of of people's lives, whatever is happening to them. The important thing is that we are a welcoming church, and that way we create safety for all. And institutional abuse, well, I'll leave that there. How do we respond well? And let me just see, because you're ready for doing some, I think, yeah, great. 3 more slides and then you work. Wonderful, great, okay. Right, or not, as you might think. And we are doing brilliant for time as well. What do we do if you're concerned? If you're concerned about a child or an adult, well, we watch for signs and symptoms, okay? We know unusual behaviours. Be guided by training. This is, if you like, the start of, not the end of, your safeguarding training. I hope that you think, oh, I don't know about domestic abuse. I might go and do a course. The council have got this course on. I'll go in, sign up for it. It's free. There's lots of online courses, by the way, that are. Follow your policies, procedures, and practice guidance. And by the end of today, I think you'll probably say we need to, if we revisit our policy, it will most likely not be about your policies or your procedures, but it's more likely to be about your practice guidance. Have we got sufficient there for social media? Have we got sufficient there for the activities that we are doing, for the ministries that we are engaging in? And do we need to add something there so that everyone is doing what they should be doing? Because if we don't have some guidelines on it, we will do what we think is best, and that's not. I don't believe in common sense. I believe in good sense child protection, because my common sense is different to your common sense. I illustrate that by telling you that I support Nottingham Forest. Now, to me, everyone should. Very few do. Right now, with our latest I'm glad this isn't being recorded. Right now, with our latest manager, I'm even doubting that myself. But that's another thing. Right, be guided by training, policies and procedures. Right, now what must we do? Listen and take seriously what we are being told. Right, God gave us 2 ears for a reason. Right, 1 mouth, 2 ears. I think that is significant. Right, listen. Now, maintain confidentiality, and I've got some slides later that will reinforce all of this, but maintain confidentiality. Let me be clear what confidentiality is. Confidentiality is what's called need to know. You pass it on to your safeguarding officer. You may share, if you're unsure, maybe a team leader, and pass that on. What confidentiality isn't is the following. Well, I shared it with my wife, who would always share with her best friend, who obviously then shares with her husband, who then tells his mates down the pub. That is not confidentiality. Let me tell you what it also isn't. Well, we're a church that is bathed in prayer. And so, along with passing this on to our safeguarding officer, I put it on the prayer chain. But you'll be pleased to hear I didn't name the individuals. I simply said a family with 3 children aged 4, 5 and 11 who... that is not confidentiality. And why do we keep things confidential? We keep things confidential because we might ruin an investigation. We keep things confidential because, why does the whole church not know about the sex offender in the church, just key leaders? People might vote with their feet and leave, but in identifying the sex offender, if you listen to what I said earlier, we may identify who the victims are. That's why we do things, and that's why we have to have confidence in our leadership that they are dealing, coming on to the whistleblowing in a minute, that's why we have to have confidence in our leadership that they are dealing with things appropriately. And then I'll come on to the next bit. We do not investigate. If you're a police officer or a social worker, you will know not to investigate, right? Because that's the role of the police officer or the social worker. Even if we've got those skills to do so, we do not mark our own homework. What we do is clarify details. But the moment we have sufficient details to say this, prima facie, this would suggest that abuse is happening, is when we pass that on. Now, that's not to say we don't involve, the pastor. Of course, he may need to know things, because if they're not, depends on what your structure is in terms of safeguarding officer. Yeah, because there might be pastoral implications there, but that is keeping it to a very narrow field. Now, people say, well, can the pastor be the safeguarding officer? Well, all I can say is, if we were to follow a school model, then the person that it goes to is often somebody on the leadership team of that school, which is invariably either the deputy head or the head, right? It's that level, right, as the designated safeguarding lead. And that is the principles there, because it needs to be that, because of the other implications. We don't delay, so our safeguarding officer, looking at him over there, has planned a 3-month cruise around the Med. Oh, well, we'll wait for him to come back. We don't want to disturb his cruise after all, and nor do you need to. That's why you have a deputy. You always have somebody else to go to. Some things are going to be needed to be actioned within an hour. But in 24 hours is usually the period, and share your concerns. Now, if you feel that the church hasn't acted, then your policy should say, we've got a whistleblowing policy. You go directly to the statutory agencies. But, I would hope that people have confidence that if they've passed something on, that it's being dealt with. Now, my experience of church is this, and and the amount of situations I've dealt with over the years is that the churches who have will pass things on, it's being dealt with, and they'll probably go back to the person who reported to say, thank you for sharing that. I'm dealing with it, but I can't give you any information. That is usually number one. Number two is this, that whoever has disclosed, if it's a matter of you've discovered abuse or you suspect abuse and pass it on, then number one usually counts. But where people have disclosed to you, either as an adult what's happened to them as a child, or an adult or as a child what's happening to them, under those circumstances, you're as likely to still be involved, because that person sees you as a trusted individual and has passed on their concerns, and you will likely be journeying with them for a considerable amount of time, because let's be real about this. Often a disclosure of abuse that goes to statutory agencies, if it goes to court, and then that can be 2 years down the line. So you might be holding that and walking and journeying with that victim of abuse for that period of time. And you will need support in that, because that dynamic then changes in terms of the relationship you have with that person, and how you often become the not just the sounding board, but often the other person that will take all the flack as well. Be aware. Now, it's about respectful uncertainty. It's about checking your impressions. Respectful uncertainty. The difficulty is that we're Christians, which means we think good of one another, and so we should. And that might taint us slightly. Oh, I can't believe that of them. Did you hear how they prayed on Sunday? I only had a meal around their house last week, etc., etc. And you can understand why the Church of England have got into some of the bother they've got with bishops and archbishops and etc. Now, check your impressions. Critically evaluate the information. If it doesn't sound right, then it needs looking into. Respectful engagement with all individuals. Maintaining that respect is there, but keeping an opening and questioning mindset. As Professor Eileen Munro says, it's showing compassion, but retaining that opening and questioning mindset. Check your impressions. Now, in everything that we do, we also need to recognise that we need to have that defensible decision making in the church context. Why, as a church, why have you acted the way you have? So imagine this, and I hope this is not something, but imagine that there's a barrister and they are going to say to you, why have you, in a court, why have you acted the way that you have? Now, whatever you do, you see, you might not quite have everything right in your policy, but is it consistent with the church policy? Number one. Is it well considered and thought through? Is it based on the best available evidence? Has it progressed the situation, moved the situation forward? Has it clearly been documented and recorded? That is what accountability, transparency, and the protection is all about. This is a slide that I developed with a missionary group who said, well, it's great you saying we've got all these policies and procedures, but we're working in countries where if we went to there isn't no statutory agency. And the next one said, well, there is a statutory agency, but if we went to them, then the mission would be at risk. And somebody else says, well, if we went to them, not only would the mission be at risk, but the child would be at risk, and the perpetrator would be at risk. And what do you do? Well, does it involve somebody who's gone from the UK there? Can you repatriate them and let the statutory agency know here why you've repatriated them? Those are the type of things I'm talking about, right? Now, I've given you it within a missionary context, but actually this slide actually lives and falls by recognising you have policies and procedures in place. We would always follow our policies and procedures, but there will always be those situations that fall slightly outside the remit. And as long as we have thoroughly thought it through, we've documented it all, we've spoken to the right people, we've done all of those things, then nobody can come to us and say, it's a cover-up, it's this, it's the other. And so, yeah, I hope that is giving you a good understanding of what we're talking about. We'll know very shortly, because we are now going to, we've got, forget that, right, I'm not going to do them because, I thought we were at the other bit. Okay, let's just run through a couple of bits of disclosure, and then we are going to get to doing an exercise. And by the way, we're up on time. You might be finished sooner than you think. I've already covered some of this. If somebody discloses, stay calm, listen, be mindful of non-verbal cues. Is not the way you approach a disclosure. Okay. Reassure. Don't promise confidentiality. People will want to know what's happening next. Will I go into care? What's going to happen to my brother? Or whatever. Don't make false promises. Just say, I haven't got answers to that, but what I have got answers to is you've said something to me that tells me that harm's happening to you. I'm therefore going to speak to our safeguarding officer. I will come back to you and let you know what's happening, and rest assured I'll do that as quickly as I can. That's all you can do. Don't answer, and of course a bit of skill around that. Acknowledge their courage. You know, nobody's going to disclose unless they trust you. Right? Unless you've got a good relationship, they will not trust you. You did the right thing in telling me. I will help and share with the right person. Those are the positive things that you can be saying to give assurance to whoever it is, child or adult, who may disclose to you. You know, recording, I've already covered a lot of that. We can, in terms of report, if we've got consent, but if an adult doesn't give us consent, but a crime's been committed or it's in the public interest, or somebody else may be at risk, maybe a child, then even without consent, we can report that. Checklist of good record keeping, right? Record, ideally within an hour or so of the conversation that you've had. People say nowadays, well, can I take my phone out? Quick video and quick whatever. That's going to put people off. I would discourage that. Right? We despite AI thinking differently, we've got fairly good brains, right? And we can retain quite a lot. And write it down. Maybe you make some quick notes, and you might use your phone to do so. We write it down, and then we may say, well, my writing we would do, right? Because I know nobody's going to be able to read what I write, so you might type it up. Fine, password protect that. Keep anything that you've got written in a locked filing cabinet, pass on to your safeguarding officer. If you pass something on that's password protected, don't put the password in the email. You know, just saying, text it through or send a different email. You know, and you know, ideally you've got an email address that says safeguarding at. Reason for that is if your safeguarding officer decides to leave because I'm not prophesying here, by the way. You know, God's got a different role for you. Then, if you've got everything in folders, etc., that just is helpful. In terms of what you write, let's clear, structured. That's where AI does help. Relevant for jargon-free. Well, I can't believe it to this person because they're washed in the blood. This is going to social services. They're going to worry if you put something like that down. You know what I'm saying, right? Non-discriminatory. Don't, whatever you do, put down, well, I always thought they were wronging. That's not helpful, right? You're showing your bias. And other, I think you know all these things, right? Use the words the person has used. Do not sanitize, right? We are very good at sanitizing. Well, I couldn't, they've used 3 swear words there and a colloquialism for something else. But if that's the way they speak, put it. Because what you don't want is the defence barrister, these barristers again, they get everywhere. You don't want the defence barrister saying, we've heard the alleged victim say this, and they would do so under, behind the screen and everything. We've heard them say this. We've read your report of what they said, and the two contradict one another. Why? Because we've sanitised it so much that it doesn't make any sense. Right? Use the words used. And if you've said, if you've done any safeguarding training, you'll know not to ask leading questions. If you have, put it down there. Did he do this is not really the best thing to say. But if you have put that, just record what you remember saying and what they said as well. Because these notes could be used in a court of law. Signing date, keep securely. Okay. Just to remind you that the Data Protection Act and GDPR, the safeguarding will always usurp data protection. Always has, always will. And to illustrate that, I want to take you back 20 plus years where 2 children died at the hands of Ian Huntley, Holly and Jessica. And the criticism that Sir Michael Bishard gave of the 2 police forces who had information about Ian Huntley's suitability to be the caretaker at Soham Sixth Form College was that neither police force shared with one another, and it certainly wasn't shared with the Sixth Form College, who could have made a decision that might have meant he wasn't given that role. So it will always be that data protection, that's not to say we share with everybody, but we do share information pertinent to and relevant to safeguarding, and that will go external as well as internal. Although it says children's there, and that's because on sharing information, I've taken it from working together. Obviously, the same principle applies for adults. Okay, now we're at the stage where you can go on your tables, and we can stop the film recording for now. So let's just look through best practice. It's all about all the things I talked about earlier. I've covered this slide earlier, and that one as well. You know, best practice is ensuring that we've got policies on ratios. Now, if we find that we haven't got enough ratios, what is our policy to say, well, do we combine groups? Do we cancel groups? What do we do? Do we have within our ratios, well, if we've got a child with additional needs, we might need one-to-one. A ratio inside the church is different to taking children on a visit somewhere. Do we risk assess everything? What about supervision? Now, you know, you're saying we've got volunteers, they give up a Sunday, and many of the rest, we can't do that. But we can actually, you know, have, let's all our youth leaders get together, our children's workers get together. How are things for you? How is there any issues that we need to discuss, etc., etc.? All the other things I expect I've covered. When we did the first scenario, I think it was the first scenario, where the youth worker was doing this, that and the other, and I said to you, the failure was actually that they probably were doing what they wanted to do, rather than what you want them to do. And so, you know, we need to have clear codes of conduct. That was clearly missing when we talk about Mike Pilavecchi. I could talk about lots of other prominent situations where people were doing what they wanted because there's not the structure in place. We need to have all those things. But I'm not talking about drowning in paperwork, because if you walk away and you're thinking, oh no, we've got to double our safeguarding policy, I have failed. I really have. Finding out what motivates people to do children's work and youth work, and doing those things, we can as easily do over a lovely cup of coffee in one of these booths to say, hey, you say you want to work with children. Well, look, let's just tell you, because it's working with children, we'll have to do some checks on you. We'll take up some references, and we've got to do a DBS check. And if that didn't put you off enough, right, why do you want to work with children? Right? And once they tell you because they're fantastic, brilliant, right? That's your recruitment there. And yes, I can give you the whole list of what recruitment is like that. How did I get there? I didn't press it. But, you know, it's all of those things. And don't worry about advertising. That's what you do at the front of the church. Say, you know, not, by the way, the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. That is not, that's not what you do. Right. Oh, yeah, that was last week, was it? Well done. Right. I mean, this is, I'm sorry for the camera, I'm disappearing. Right, this is not how you recruit, and I'm doing this because, right, well, we haven't got any children's workers now that Mrs. Bloggs has left, but I feel that God has told me who might be working for children next week. If you want to come and see me, no, that is not how, and by the way, you do everything else, don't do that. But that is not how we recruit, right? And for those of you that were recruited like that, there is a prayer ministry happening at the end, right? The lady in the polka dot top is now saying, wow. Right, really, it's not. Right, anyway, you know these things. You know, our safeguarding officer, and this is where he sinks in his chair and thinks, really, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? They're the first port of call if you've got an issue. And I've seen you've got posters around. You know, I've had a guided tour of the church, which gives me context. And you know, unbeknownst to you, I was saying, well, where's your oh yeah, that's the safeguarding poster there. And well, that's important, because that says to anybody, A, if they need help, where to go, because it's there. But also said to somebody who might have ill intent, they take safeguarding seriously here, because that's what it says on your poster. You know, it's first protocol. Ensure appropriate policies are there. Advocate for children. I've got to say that most children will disclose to people they trust. They are not going to seek out the safeguarding officer. They're going to seek out you as a children's or youth worker, who in turn will be speaking to the and communicate the safeguarding message. Now, this is full of, MASH was mentioned earlier there, and I thought I'm going to have to say what MASH is now, right? Nothing to do with potatoes, right? Although it could be, right? Liaise with statutory agencies. You do not need to know what any of these things are. Why? Because your safeguarding officer does. Okay? Amen. MASH is just multi-agency safeguarding hub, because they worked out that rather than have social services in this building and 3 miles away we'll have the police and 3 miles away we'll have what's called a LADO, they thought if we put all 3 in one building they could pass papers around the table and we could get things done far more efficiently than wait for a space in our diary for meetings. And a LADO is the local authority designated officer, and what their role is, if you're working in children's and youth work, then you are in what's called regulated activity according to the Disclosure and Barring Service. And that means you've had a disclosure done through the DBS at enhanced level, and it's checked all sorts of things. If ever there's an allegation made against a worker, then, and for children it's the LADO, PIPOT is mentioned there. For adults, it's the person in position of trust meeting that you'd be invited to. If ever there are allegations made and you're in these roles, then your safeguarding lead would have to go to a meeting to discuss how you were recruited, what the concerns are, etc. And it may not be that it doesn't meet a criminal threshold, but if somebody's behaviour is such that you think they shouldn't be working with children and you get removed from working with children, then this church, as a regulated activity provider, would have to refer that person to the DBS for barring consideration. Now, all these things weren't explained to you as you signed up to be a children's worker, but they're the things that your safeguarding officer would have to deal with. Don't worry about it. Please, please, please don't worry about it. And they're the ones that are managing that sex offender, Roger, who came into the church, and they're managing them safely, that you don't need to worry about them, but they're the ones that are attending all the strategy meetings and everything else in order to ensure that what Roger is doing meets the criteria. And ultimately, and let me say this, if somebody who has caused harm doesn't abide by your agreement, then you tell them to leave the church. Nobody has a right to work with children, and nobody has a right to be in the sphere of children if they're there intent on causing harm. Full stop. Okay? I'm not going to cover those things, and I'm not even going to cover that. I'm just going to take questions. It's 5-2. Right, we'll just kill off. Okay, I hope in this whistle-stop tour of safeguarding, as we've had today, that you've picked something up, you've learned things. You're all ready to go, I know, because actually I've shared so much that could you all promise me, in terms of your homework, whatever other homework your leaders might be asking you to do, could you all promise me in terms of your homework that you're going to do this, right? You're going to do something nice this afternoon. Now that might be eat a cream cake, that might be go for a walk round a lake, but please, please, please don't do the ironing, you guys. Right, or maybe you do the ironing for the, you get somebody else to do the ironing that you would normally do. That might be the nice thing, right? But the reason I say that is that this can be quite heavy, and it has been in parts, and you need to give yourself a little treat. But by the way, that's not go to the latest Mercedes-Benz dealership and whatever, but a little treat might be what you need. So please, please, please just look after yourself and just have that little treat. That's it from me. I hope you've found today engaging. You've engaged with me, so I'm guessing so. Have you got any questions? Because I've got 4 whole minutes to answer, and then you can go. Honest, 1 o'clock is cut off. So you go at 1, but if you want to stop because, hey, we're having a ball, then you stop. Okay.
Yeah, my question is about WhatsApp, because as a church you can have official WhatsApp chat rooms, but people can easily set up their own WhatsApp things that are involved with church or on the sphere of church and that thing. How do you regulate such things, and what would you recommend as a good policy for such a app?
That is a brilliant question, because actually it covers some of the difficulties that we have, that we have different roles and responsibilities in church, and we have relationships. So where we have a school, they have a very blanket policy. You do not, in fact, people have been dismissed as teachers because they've set up WhatsApp channels for the best intentions to help people get through exams, etc. But of course, we are church and we have relationships outside. And how do you, I've just become a youth worker, but I'm best friends with, and I've got the child, and there might be, friends with your children, etc. And you've got all of those. And how do you disentangle that in terms of social media or anything else? We can keep boundaries offline more easily, but suddenly we're taking on roles, and it's recognizing that what that means. If somebody is a minister, and I'll use an Anglican expression, right? Somebody's wearing a dog collar. When they take the dog collar off, they are still the Reverend such and such. And in terms of some of the issues that there have been, it's about vicarious liability. If you walk like a duck and you quack like a duck, you are a duck, right? So how do we ensure that there is that? And I think it comes down to expectations and saying to people, we want you to grow in your ministry, and we'd like you to take on this role, but recognizing with that role comes responsibilities. And although you may be friends here, we would urge you not to engage in patterns of behaviour that might bring the church into disrepute or may blur boundaries, etc., etc. And that's where codes of conduct, along with here's a job description, this is what we would expect, but actually it's a code of conduct that says we do not engage with WhatsApp in a personal manner because we hold this role, because the two can be conflated and misunderstood. And are you talking as a friend of this person, or are you talking as a youth leader of this person? So I think it's about principles. I always say this, in terms of social media, we can often become frightened of that. I'm a technophobe, it's the kids' domain, it's this, that and the other. And I liken it to the fact that if a young person, say a 10-year-old and myself, right, 62, never mind, I don't know, I don't look it. If a 10-year-old and myself were to go on one of the racing sims, 99 times out of 100, that 10-year-old is going to beat me. But thankfully, we don't then say, and what my driving like is probably precarious at the best of times, but so it's not a good example, but we don't then say, oh great, that 10-year-old, we're going to give the keys to your car because they can beat you. Because although they're good at one thing, they don't have the experience and all of those other things that there are. And so when we think of social media, we have wisdom beyond our years. They think they have, right? And so if we think on those ways and steer them, it doesn't matter what it's called, because the Snapchat of yesterday is going to be the whatever of today. You know, we hadn't heard of Facebook, Snapchat, WhatsApp, etc. 20 years ago, there was no such thing. And next year it will be something else. And it doesn't matter, because we understand the principles of staying safe online, which we can instill in our young people, and we've got some guidelines there. If we put those things in place, whatever the next thing is that they're all rushing to, because no young person goes on Facebook, because adults started going on Facebook. Yeah, whatever it is, but as youth leaders, that hey, that's you can talk their language, but it's the principles. So I hope that's answered it in a more rounded way. It's about establishing boundaries, but we can do so by saying this is about developing your ministry gifts and talents, and in that way we're not giving prohibition. What we're doing is bringing some sense into the equation. Yeah. Okay. We're now 2 minutes over, but I'll take one more question. Or I'll not take one more question, because you're all saying you're 2 minutes over. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Right. Okay. Right. Go enjoy whatever you're doing. You're buying a Mercedes, I know. Right, okay, thank you.